Hello, everybody. Welcome to this module on data monitoring and accountability, a part of the Behaviour Hubs programme. My name's Stuart Locke, and I'm one of the National Behaviour Advisors.
Hello, I'm Jane Lowe, joining you today too. One of the behaviour advisors on the DFE team too.
And Jane and I are going to take you through this session, as I say, on data monitoring and accountability. We intend, as our outcomes of this session, for you to be able to create a useful behaviour and attendance data set, to be able to analyse behaviour and attendance data to inform school development planning. We want to develop an ongoing commentary on performance and to use behaviour and attendance data to inform your self-evaluation. So, creating a holistic data set. Creating a holistic data set is the first step towards establishing robust data capture. There are three important elements to address in order to create a functional data set. Those are capturing all the components of behaviour culture, monitoring and testing the behaviour culture thoroughly and accurately will require data capture on all elements that make up that culture. Refining and creating systems to capture data accurately and efficiently. In order to collect the fullest picture, the most valid picture, it may be necessary to create new data systems or adjust and extend existing ones. And establishing a monitoring cycle. Planning for data capture is essential, and where possible, it should align with existing monitoring routines. Data is important to give an accurate picture. It's factual, it's tangible. It tells us how we're doing. Capturing all the components of behaviour culture. When planning for data capture, it's essential to think carefully about the key requirements and establish a data set that has value and purpose. Having enough data to test the systems and pupil performance is essential, but it is not helpful to create sophisticated or complicated systems that churn out more data than will be used in shaping practice. In my experience, more data can cause schools to run less efficiently or less well. Attendance data. One of the richest data sets you have access to each day is attendance and punctuality. Accurate completion of registers and adherence to late procedures produce the daily data set for you, which feeds directly into your management information system. I'm sure that you'll be aware, and the majority of you will be signed up to the DFE automated daily data collection and be using it. This was launched last year. It's statutory from August 2024. It provides schools, multi-academy trusts and local authorities with daily attendance data in an easy-to-use way, saving schools time creating reports and checking information. It's one of the most important sources of data that I think can be helpful to us in improving our schools. These reports can be used to help schools to meet their expectations outlined in working together to improve school attendance, the guidance from the department, including having a clear attendance policy and putting effective strategies in place to support attendance. Incident data. Very, very common. Behaviour incident data is generally recorded using the school's management information system and often feeds directly into the school consequence system. Most management information systems have the capacity to record both positive and negative behaviours. Yet frequently, records focus on negative behaviours as these must be locked to initiate sanctions. It's important that staff invest in promoting and modelling social norms and teaching the appropriate behaviours that we want pupils to demonstrate. It's equally important that staff log pupils' successful demonstration or application of them. Rewards and sanctions, for example, points, commendations, calls home, detentions, reports, timeout, removal. Data from the consequence system generally sits in the management information system, but there may be elements that are not logged here. Report systems may be run by pastoral teams, and timeout or other internal provision may sit outside of the management information system. To capture the full picture, it's important to consider having it all recorded in one place. The national data set, super important, and we've already talked about attendance, but also on expulsions and suspensions. While national data on attendance, expulsions and suspensions can be dated because it reports the past, it provides useful markers and informs our expectations. The trends in this data over time provide useful benchmarks and give an indication as to where the data is heading. On learning walks and book trawls, you will already have regular rhythms of learning walks and book trawls across the school. So it's helpful to capitalise on these to gather behaviour and attendance data. Intelligence on punctuality, levels of engagement, enjoyment, teaching of behaviour, adherence to social norms, and implementation of rewards and sanctions can all be gathered by visiting classrooms and looking at books. It doesn't need something new necessarily in many schools to capture information, valuable information on how things are going. Stakeholder feedback. I often say that I think this is one of the most important things for me in running my schools in order to capture information that helps us to improve our schools. All relevant stakeholders need to be consulted regularly to find out about the culture. This will include staff, pupils, governors, parents, and other partners. Anonymous surveys, anonymous at their low stakes for the people filling them in, and discussion groups are useful mechanisms to capture honest feedback from targeted groups, entire year groups, for example, or the whole school. The survey tools that you will have should allow your schools to do this. You should consider a behaviour audit which draws on a number of the sources that I've already mentioned to provide a holistic picture of the school. You may have identified gaps in your data set. You may want mechanisms or identify mechanisms that need tweaking to collate information. An audit to give a full picture of your current context is incredibly useful. It's a useful annual exercise to take stock. As I said, you should consider an anonymous staff survey undertaken to capture stakeholder views. How do your staff perceive the culture? As a leader, I think I know very much about my schools, but I don't know what it's like when I'm not there and the teacher's in the classroom or the support staff is working with a group of pupils. It provides valuable insight into staff understanding and how staff feel about the school. This data is data that could not necessarily be captured just by you talking to staff or from the management information systems. It provides a well-rounded 360-degree review of the school to inform the way forward. You almost certainly will come across feedback you didn't expect. Some of it will be uncomfortable. I say it can be personally hurtful to leaders, and some of it reassuring. But while it's personally hurtful, just asking yourself the question, what if it's right, is really important to improving a school. Refining and creating systems to capture data accurately and efficiently. When creating or adjusting systems to capture data, it is important to ensure that the system will gather all of the data you need and then disaggregate data by cohort, group, characteristic, and so on to enable you to explore different elements. So cohort data. It's important to be able to look at the data around groups of pupils and staff. Looking at whole school cohort data provides the headline news on how things are going. Digging into year groups, key stages, form groups, and teaching sets provides a more detailed picture and allows schools to identify those areas that need further exploration. Pupil level data. Having the ability to zoom in on individual pupil level data is essential. Any system should give leaders the ability to sort data based on pupil characteristics, gender, ethnicity, special educational needs and disabilities, EAL, free school meals, pupil premium. Exploring data around pupil characteristics will enable leaders to identify gaps in provision or barriers to learning. Scrutiny of pupil characteristic data also enables leaders to monitor the school's duties under the Equality Act to ensure pupils with protected characteristics are not disproportionately affected. In my experience, it often results in extra questions to ask rather than firm conclusions, but is really useful. Ease of access and input. Data capture needs to be immediate, and staff need adequate technology to facilitate this. The logging of behaviour needs to be built into lesson and break time routines. It has to happen quickly to ensure that feedback is immediate, and so that staff do not forget to record the incident. In the case of a survey, like I mentioned earlier, it's important to give time to ensure it can be completed fully in an environment that's conducive. Individual staff and leaders need to feel free to contribute. For example, for leaders within an SLT meeting that's open and reflective. Continued professional development for staff. If schools are introducing new systems or adjusting existing ones, staff will need training to support timely and accurate data entry. Do not underestimate the size of this task. It's not a case of just sending them off onto the MIS or a spreadsheet. They will need to understand and be able to log behaviour, provide feedback to the pupil as per the policy, and take any necessary follow-up steps such as a call home, praise postcard, detention, or whatever it might be according to the school policy. When new staff join the school or agency staff provide cover, they will need training in how to use the systems. And the reason we say don't underestimate the size of this task is because regardless of what you do, it's the alignment in implementation that's probably going to lead to whether the school improves sufficiently or not. Definitions and precision. Not surprisingly, behaviour descriptors within management information systems are generic and can lack crisp definition. For example, terms such as defiance or persistent disruption will mean different things to different people. Colleagues will need clear definitions, worked examples, and opportunities to moderate their classifications in order to use the categories consistently. I've got experience of using a professional development session to say, give me some examples where you were unclear, and let's agree what we would all do in the circumstances that are outlined. The generic descriptors within the system are unlikely to match the behaviours leaders have identified as those they want the pupils to display or develop over time. So leaders may need to work with technical staff to reconfigure descriptors so that the systems track performance against their expectations, against what we want for our school. Consistent implementation. Every member of staff needs to record behaviour consistently to ensure that the data set is as strong and accurate as it can be. Leaders need to monitor the data input of staff and provide support to guide them and strengthen recording. And of course, the professional development that I described earlier and the time. Monitoring may identify staff who need support with categorization or those who may need prompting if they are not logging behaviours. Jane.
Thanks, Stuart. Let's take a look at monitoring. So it's helpful to define monitoring, as the quote says here, very simply to observe and check the progress or quality of something over a period of time. So to keep it under systematic review. And it's important to expect every member of staff within a school to have a responsibility to monitor behaviour, either within their own classroom, on corridors, in the canteen, or on the playground. The frequency of monitoring is going to be determined by the focus of our monitoring. So, for example, staff on duty will be monitoring the behaviour of pupils on a daily basis, and therefore senior leaders should be monitoring the way in which staff carry out that duty responsibility on a daily basis too, to make sure it's as aligned to our expectation. And that type of leadership presence not only acts as a prompt for staff to be there, be on time and do the right thing, but also as a support mechanism to empower them too, and to convey those really high expectations to set the standard with the support of leaders behind them. Building monitoring into existing structures and routines is really important. Stuart mentioned just now that schools already have really well-planned monitoring calendars that incorporate assessment points, data drop, learning walks, book trawls, and so on. And it's essential that we weave regular monitoring of behaviour into these plans and that we don't create additional activity for leaders to take part in and also for staff to be subjected to, so that staff are not overloaded. And behaviour monitoring is seen as part of normal monitoring activity that's already happening. It's not anything additional. The benefit of that as well, bringing together academic attendance and behaviour data at key points, also enables leaders to explore the relationship between those performance measures and target intervention accordingly. Aligning that data capture to other activities also makes it manageable, not just for those capturing it, but also for those leaders who need to provide feedback and undertake those activities. Having a focus on behaviour during things like book trawls and learning walks will mean no extra work for staff, no extra burden. It will simply enable leaders to capture a richer data set when they're out there doing those things. In the case of attendance, you'll be working in partnership with the local authority too, in line with that new guidance, working together to improve attendance. And that new guidance outlines how that relationship will work, the frequency of meetings, and that review of data. So supporting staff to monitor effectively and also efficiently. If what I say is true and we're expecting all of our staff to monitor, then it's up to leaders to ensure that they're able to do that confidently. In its simplest form, that will mean support for all staff to understand how to scan their areas, promote and teach appropriate behaviours, model adherence to social norms, record behaviours accurately, and follow through with consequences. Form tutors, key people within schools, as are class teachers, they will need help to make use of their weekly attendance and behaviour data reports. They'll need to know what to look for, which things they should follow up on, what actions they might take, and how they're going to sit down and set targets with children. Middle and senior leaders will need to understand the school data set too. They'll need to know which data reports to look at. They'll need to be able to interrogate that data and to identify those patterns and groups that Stuart mentioned just now. Considering the intensity of monitoring during a transition is really important. And the examples that I've spoken about illustrate the frequency of monitoring is variable depending on our focus. So the intensity of monitoring will also vary depending on the school's position. It's essential for leaders to intensify monitoring when introducing new developments or adjustments. For example, if a school were to introduce a new corridor expectations, leaders would need to really front load that and think about monitoring that they knew it was happening to make some fair judgments about its impact. Their presence on corridors would allow them to model to others how they should promote those expectations and actually monitor them doing it to see they're getting it right. Similarly, if new recording systems were introduced, intensive monitoring would allow leaders to spot holes or problems in recording in those very early stages, which they could then respond to rapidly to have those follow-up conversations with staff, amend those errors or misinterpretations. So consider the intensity of monitoring when constructing an action plan to respond to the audit. When analysing data, leaders and staff should use an objective lens. This is tricky when it's your school, but when you reflect on the audit feedback that you've gathered as a team, it will be essential to stand back, take a breath, and reflect on the data objectively. Stuart spoke about some of that information potentially being personally hurtful. So having that objectivity, standing back, and looking at the data as it lies is a really important thing to do. And data should be viewed from multiple perspectives at school level, group level, and individual staff and pupil level too. Leaders should pose questions to drill down further in order to identify some of those root causes, system problems, or maybe a failure to meet individual needs. Data patterns vary widely. If leaders and others are skilled at doing that drilling down that I've spoken of, they are easy to spot, and they might include days of the week, points of time during a term, times of the day. You might have subject-based issues, potential site challenges depending on your school, maybe isolated blocks, split sites. Unstructured times are often a key feature of action plans when schools are looking at times of the day to focus on. It's beneficial for leaders to focus on the rises and falls within the data too. There may be time factors, site locations, faculties, and other areas of the school that sustain strong attendance at all times. So let's look at some of those rises in the data and have a look at where that best practice is. Finding out more about those positive patterns and best practice can really add to a school's capacity. These patterns in your data set may be the indicators that you spotted to inform change and introduce a new routine or procedure based on that best practice. Let's think about groups. Leaders should take a systematic approach to drilling down into the data from a whole school starting point. And that will involve focus on key stages, year groups, forms, teaching groups. Similarly, pupil characteristics should be explored to assess the engagement and inclusion of all of the identified groups. Characteristics such as ethnicity, gender, EAL, children in need, looked after children, those with a social worker or those with SEND, in order to identify any barriers or challenges that leaders need to address as part of their policy and procedures. It's also important for leaders to be mindful of their duties and responsibilities under the equality duty. Things might stand out in your data set around particular groups. It could tell you about what is working or what isn't working, and it should certainly inform the approach that you take. You'll have questions to ask when you look at that data. Are SEND learners overrepresented in remove or isolation data? Do boys dominate the behaviour data set? What does this tell you if this is the case? How might you need to respond to that? And what else might you need to look at? In the diagram, you might be asking yourself some questions whilst I've been talking about what is it that year 4 are doing? Why are things going so well in terms of punctuality? And what have year 2 been doing since week 2? And some of that you can draw from the data, but you might need to go away and explore further and ask many more questions of different stakeholders too. I want to mention isolated incidents and individuals. One-off incidents and individual pupils might not necessarily bring about large-scale changes in whole school policy, but they should inform it. Review of one-off incidents is essential in order to effectively update things like emergency procedures or provide feedback to those individuals involved to inform future responses and to tweak procedures in response. Homing in on individual pupils can, though, be a valuable way to gather intelligence on glitches in the school system that just don't work for some children. That exploration at individual pupil level might lead to changes in the alignment of, for example, behaviour and SEND systems, or reasonable adjustments to systems for individual pupils, or targeted specialist support for pupils in crisis, potentially. You can see here some further data patterns, again, just examples of data taken from school systems that give you a notion of things that you might explore, things that you might look at, and further questions that you might have. I want to talk about the continuous improvement cycle, and it's going to be very, very familiar territory for all of you. And the picture that you see here, I'm sure, is one that you're familiar with. This series of questions presented on the slide helps to frame what needs to be established in order to bring together an improvement plan. So first question, what's the current picture? The content covered so far on capturing behaviour culture data will allow leaders to address this question once systems are developed or adjusted and data entry is underway. The combination of audit data and observations that you gather through your monitoring cycle should provide a really rich data picture of your current position. Second question, what's behind that current picture? So what lies beneath will have been identified through careful analysis, or leaders may have initiated further monitoring to find out more when they've looked at that first initial data set. The data set might present further questions or other areas that you need to go away and have a closer look at. Where the data is positive, you might want to go and look at practice to inform your action plan, to think about grabbing some of that best practice and using it to shape procedures. Where the data is not so great, you may need to know more and understand some of the reasons that sit behind it. So what do we need to improve, and what impact will this have? Third question. Patterns and groups identified within the data will clarify where leaders need to focus their energy. Qualitative feedback from identified groups might also inform the approach that leaders will take to secure those improvements, so finding out how we need to tackle the issue. Predicting the impact and changes or improvements will have is also really important. Obviously, leaders will want to send the data in the right direction. That's what we're all hoping for, and secure the positive performance of all groups. But it's worth thinking through before we launch what some of those knock-on effects might be, and some of the impact that those changes might have, so that we can carefully monitor when data potentially heads in the wrong direction initially at launch, and avoiding some of those barriers or challenges in the planning stages by thinking that through. An example. If leaders choose to stop Key Stage 4 pupils leaving site at lunchtime to address afternoon attendance and punctuality, we'll need to consider some other things in the round with that. We'll need to consider how that impacts on lunchtime supervision, what kind of impact it has on canteen arrangements, and potentially how that has a knock-on effect on the behaviour of Key Stage 3 pupils. So thinking through the bigger picture prior. Okay, next question. What do we need to do to secure those improvements? So that scenario that I've just talked through will now require meticulous planning and will certainly demand very specific actions from the team. Engaging with the detail will give clarity to staff and hopefully avert any unwanted side effects or data heading in the wrong direction. Finally, sounds super simple this, just do it. The statement makes it sound very, very easy, and it certainly isn't. As outlined in relation to data capture, staff will need support with modelling and feedback to do it, but to do it right. So let's think about developing the improvement strategy. And first of all, a comprehensive action plan is key. Your plan should be informed by the data picture and the leader's analysis of that. The plan will map out exactly what leaders want from the culture. Actions outlined in that plan will give real clarity on what everybody will be doing, the resources that will be needed to be invested, and how that's going to be monitored too, and think about frequency of monitoring there. Having clarity on the desired outcomes is essential to give that clear picture to everybody. The behaviour culture that leaders aspire to should be tangible and evident within the plan. There's no room for ambiguity in the plan. Everyone must be clear about what they have to do and when and where accountability lies to, and what success will look like and how that's going to be monitored. If the incident data set is young or underdeveloped, you might refer to trends over time rather than exact figures. In the case of something like punctuality or attendance, your targets and success criteria should be far more exacting. So be clear and concise in that plan. Staff training and support. Execution of the plan or implementation will most definitely require staff training at every single level. A whole school policy launch would rely on training for all staff on the new expectations, social norms, and the consequence and other systems that underpin that. Leaders should then follow that up with modelling on whatever the focus is, how to supervise corridors, how to undertake effective meet and greet to get children ready for learning, undertaking gate duty in the morning, a whole host of things, but explicit modelling. There'll be some more specialist elements of the plan, such as data monitoring or managing pastoral systems, which might demand further specialist training for those designated staff involved. Training gaps should be identified once that plan is drawn up, so that those individuals have the support they need to do what's expected ahead of time. A lack of training might lead to gaps or poor delivery or poor execution of the plan, which will certainly weaken the improvement strategy. Okay, finally, track progress against the plan. Having those eyes on delivery against the plan and its impact is fundamental. We can't afford to simply wait until the data drop at the end of that cycle or the end of the half term. Monitoring implementation of actions is as important in some cases. Leaders will need to monitor it on a daily basis to guide the school on its journey towards a consistent approach. And the best made plans, no matter how much energy we put into getting that plan really robust and really strong, it's going to require adjustment and tweaking based on the findings and the monitoring that's coming back and some of that impact data that's coming out. And leaders need to be mindful to give plans time, giving them time to work, but addressing any immediate barriers as they come. But allowing that time is key. Things don't happen instantly. We need to give staff time and children time for things to land and things to become part of a routine. So it's widely known in the teaching profession that feedback is one of the most powerful influences on learning and achievement. So it's important to apply that principle here too. An accurate, data-driven stream on the behaviour culture provides almost real-time feedback on how things are going. So when you undertake your audit, it's going to be essential to feed back to the team and governors with the picture at the starting point. So what has everyone said? What do we now know about the current picture? What does the data say? What do we need to do next? How will that data inform the action plan? And what will that journey be over time? As it can't all happen at once. So first of all, paint an accurate picture that's data-driven. And it's important here, honesty and transparency in that picture are essential to drive improvement, but also to secure ownership from those people who have shared their views with you through that audit exercise. Consider the audiences. Leaders will need to keep all stakeholders abreast of how things are going with behaviour. They'll have a vested interest in keeping them in touch as a useful way to give ownership back to them and enable them to make a contribution during that period. Plan for effective and precise dissemination too. And leaders are going to need to deploy different methods to disseminate depending on those stakeholder groups. There may be elements of the commentary that leaders will want to target at defined groups. Use that commentary to identify strengths and next steps. Leaders and practitioners would expect to structure feedback to pupils in exactly the same way. They would also want them to get involved in that assessment dialogue, so expect that as leaders too. It's important to share the commentary and open up the dialogue with stakeholders to explore patterns and the blips in the data, and also to plan the way forward. Let them know where things are strong so that they can build on that and celebrate some of that. Equally, let them know where their dips are and think about how do we navigate around that? How do we make it stronger, and learn from that? Once we've established robust data systems and staff are engaging in a consistent and accurate recording, hallelujah, great, we're almost there. The reports and commentary drawn from the system will provide us with an accurate reflection of what's happening at the school. Fantastic. I want to mention something here about reality versus perception. And perception and reality are two very, very different things. And behaviour, as we all know, can be a very emotive topic. And any individual's interpretation of the behaviour culture in a school will be influenced by their perceptions. A data-driven picture and ongoing commentary help to give balance and provide stakeholders with the factual information to inform their views and their mindset. And it's important to share that data when it's heading in the wrong direction, to unpick it with the team and share the way forward, and equally when it's headed in the right direction, to celebrate, offer praise, and think about how that informs practice moving forward. Feedback is valuable, appreciated, and offers assurances. Educationalists know the value of feedback. I've just mentioned that there, and it's important not to underestimate that in context. New developments around behaviour culture involve change and challenge for staff, which is hard work. It's heavy lifting. It's important to recognise their efforts and assure them this work is valuable, even though some days it certainly won't feel that way. It's important to highlight cause and effect. And it's important to draw attention to issues or failings when they arise and highlight the cause and effect that sits underneath that. So, for example, leaders should remind and direct staff to be at duty points in line with the rota, or communicate their expectations on punctuality to the parents of pupils who are late. So that reaffirming expectations all of the time and thinking about, if we're not in the right place at the right time, what the impact of that might be. We should initiate immediate and planned responses. Sharing that data picture regularly enables staff and leaders to continually fine-tune practice and respond almost immediately as the data lands. And that might involve very immediate changes to things like meet and greet routines to eliminate late arrival to lessons. Conversely, it could involve communicating with targeted form groups who absolutely smash their positive points targets and manage 100% attendance for the week. And that immediate feedback to offer reward and shape processes to address those issues is essential. So the data pitch is going to need to be delivered in different ways to different groups of stakeholders. And we need to think about that format and how it needs to be adjusted accordingly. So in relation to staff, leaders should encourage staff to interact with the school data as much as they possibly can. So the headlines on how the school cohort are doing are important, but also the identification of groups and individuals requires a focus too, so that staff can really target their work. Leaders should model use of the data commentary so that staff are able to go away and use those same principles when talking to their teaching groups, form groups, or even parents of those pupils too. Sharing whole school incident numbers or point scores with pupils and families might not be helpful if they do not routinely have access to that data, as they're going to struggle to make sense of it. However, outlining data trends, including the reduction of some behaviours or increases in others, or issues around particular year groups or times of the day or parts of the routine, might be useful and might enable them to reflect on the contribution they make as parents or pupils at the school. Leaders should provide governors with sufficient levels of information so that they can understand systems, processes, trends over time, and targets so that they are able to hold leaders to account. So the commentary is going to need to be disseminated in a variety of ways to reach that range of target audiences that I spoke about. And leaders will be preparing and delivering to several audiences, but other staff will also convey the commentary too. They'll take that on and share it with children or people within their departments. And leaders need to ensure that staff are supported to plan the commentary in order to share the appropriate data, provide that targeted feedback, and convey those expectations. So here are some of the examples that we might share that message. So staff briefing, that's the most common place to deliver messages on behaviour. And that channel allows leaders to provide staff with that daily top up of what's the real picture and what's essential in terms of leading change and having that ready live commentary so that staff can adjust their practice here and now in real time. That staff briefing is also an opportunity to reboot staff by sharing the data, celebrating maybe downward trends, if that's the way we're hoping it'll go, and outlining what they and the pupils are doing well, motivating them for the next big push and encouraging them to go out ready to make the changes or improvements that day, doing the rah-rah. And you can see from the slide here the significant shifts staff have achieved, applauding that as essential, an example of some data here. And staff should recognise the efforts they make and the impact they have on the data and see their role and responsibility in that. Assemblies, senior leaders and pastoral leads should adopt the pupil version, if you like, of the staff briefing in assemblies, using the data, offering praise, conveying expectations, and sending them away really clear about what to be proud of and what it is they need to work on. Form, reflection, or circle time, and tutors and class teachers will need to follow up on whole year or class group messages that they may be received in assembly or briefings, and then work in partnership with pupils within those groups to disseminate those messages to children. Displays, so reference points displayed around the school showcasing the data are really useful for staff and pupils. Staff can drop by to remind themselves of the data, and pupils can look at their form's performance compared to the others, healthy competition. Newsletters. The audience for school newsletters is far-reaching now, and leaders would hope that pupils, parents, and other external stakeholders are avid readers, and I'm sure they all are. But providing that data commentary on behaviour culture here seizes another opportunity to let parents know the current position and how they can help support that and that ongoing expectation. Parents' evening and events. These events provide the opportunity to convey those messages about the whole school picture through that introductory briefing from leaders alongside those one-to-one discussions they might have about their individual child's data set. The head teacher's report and reports to governors will often follow a standard template in schools. And as outlined previously, it's important to furnish governors with all of the data they need to provide effective support and challenge back to leaders. And when schools are introducing new systems or adjusting existing ones, reports may need to include additional data and an extended commentary to outline changes in performance. and also to outline just how much resource is behind that initiative so that governors are aware of the fact that it's a school priority and everyone is behind it. I'm going to hand back to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Jane. So we come to honesty and transparency. Now, we are human, and so we have an understandable incentives and desires which can cause us to internalize some bias. And we need to actively think about this, because if the commentary lacks integrity, it's not based on data or excludes elements of data, leaders are unable to secure buy-in from stakeholders and plan effectively for improvements. For schools at the beginning of the journey to change behaviour culture, the data set and commentary can be daunting. I talked earlier about it being personally hurtful, but there will be elements to celebrate and point to as good practice, as at the same time as being honest about the challenges ahead of us, in order to bring people together aligned around how we're going to improve. It's important for stakeholders to be aware of the starting point. Be clear about how the team have responded to the survey that you did or the action plan that you might have created. And things staff flagged as an issue, you said, we did, is something here to help illustrate that. Or you said, not a priority for right now, is also equally transparent and secures buy-in. Targeted praise. Teachers rehearse this with pupils all the time, and it's essential to treat adults the same way. Leaders should praise with real clarity so adults know which bits they need to repeat, stop, or do next. It has to be authentic, though. Like, I saw Mr. X do this really well in their lesson. These are the features that made it really successful. Manageable next steps. When delivering commentary, leaders will automatically direct staff to take action to address patterns in the data. It's important when addressing issues in the data that leaders unpick causal factors and ways forward in order to establish logical improvement steps. For example, if negative corridor behaviour soars, leaders would need to contemplate a number of things, including corridor duty, corridor behaviour expectations, communication, movement systems, meet and greet routines, sanctions to address non-compliance. There'll be immediate things that staff can do following a briefing, but systems building and staff training will be needed to secure the big push, so it's not dependent on one or two individuals persistently reminding people. Support to secure next steps. Different colleagues will need varying levels of support at different times. All staff will need to be briefed on what they need to do, what their responsibility is to hold the system together. They'll need to see it modelled by others. They'll require feedback on their performance to refine practice, and they may need reminders when they do not do what is expected of them. New and inexperienced staff may need more intensive support from mentors or faculty, key stage leaders, or senior leaders. Using data to inform self-evaluation. Bringing the data together to inform judgments leaders make about a school is a complex exercise. It's important for leaders to draw on other comparative data, but the most important focus has to be whether a school has implemented the action plan that we've created and their performance against the targets they set for themselves. The plan's vital because, as we've outlined throughout this session, it has been constructed based on your accurate data picture at the start of your improvement journey. Benchmarking. There's value in comparing the performance of any school with all schools, similar schools, and those it has a relationship with. The school must always compare performance against itself over time. What is happening and what is changing? What's the accurate position right now? Because that begs the question, what's the most important thing right now? The data story. Data points on their own and this year-to-date data sets provide a snapshot. The data story provides much more as it illustrates changes in the data over time, along with annotations to identify key developments. You can see from the slide here, simple annotations indicate the launch of a new strategy, the impact of groups of children, and the introduction of targeted provision. National data on attendance, expulsions, and suspensions. While, as I said earlier, it's dated, these provide useful markers to inform expectations. Within this dataset, schools can also look at performance at regional and local authority level. The trends in this data over time provide useful benchmarks and give an indication as to where your data is heading and where you sit. Individual schools will certainly plot their journey towards national targets as part of their improvement plan. On local data, schools often have access to local data sets from their local authorities and are able to position their school against neighbouring settings. This may be helpful in some cases, but leaders need to be mindful of the very different cohorts that neighbouring schools might serve. Leaders may select several similar schools locally who are good comparators. Trust schools, particularly from the multi-academy trust. Trust data reports provide invaluable intelligence around a group of schools with a shared vision and consistent approaches. Schools that are new to a trust may well utilise overall trust performance data and targets to set medium or long-term targets for their own school. Similar schools. Of course, schools are unique places. They face very different challenges, they serve very different communities. Leaders should select comparator schools with similar contexts and cohorts with similar characteristics. Just on annotation, when plotting a data story, annotation is critical as fixed data points on their own could show some correlation, but don't necessarily explain cause and effect and impact of school improvement activity. In fact, quite often, the data story might beg further questions. It doesn't call for war and peace. It doesn't have to be extensive and take hours of time, but careful annotation of the data set with humble or tentative conclusions, or lining up the improvement plan with the data set to identify when new routines were introduced, when monitoring started, when plans were refined, and the impact on data. Like it allows a context for the story. Growth. Immediate impact is great to demonstrate rapid improvement, and there will be many aspects of change behaviour culture that show positive trends really quickly in the data. But real change takes time, and there will be developments that take time to shift or initially could result in negative trends. For example, if leaders introduce new expectations around uniform or punctuality, there may be a significant surge in behaviour points, detentions, or other sanctions. Equally, raising the bar through new classroom rules, such as kind hands and feet, might challenge children in the early stages and send the data soaring as staff record incidents. A school that invests in new recording systems and trains staff to record everything consistently is likely to show a negative trend over time without the commentary to explain the changes. It might look like things are getting worse, even when they're actually getting better. These examples and many more actually show growth and development, which is important to capture and goes back to what I've just been saying about the data story. When thinking about and describing growth, it might be helpful to consider the descriptors used in a tool that we used in the behaviour hubs. Identifying. Leaders are identifying a realistic picture of what is happening and the work needed in this area. This could be the pattern you spot in your audit or survey data that you might have done. Developing and implementing. Leaders have identified what is working well and those areas that need further development. They're in the process of building systems, routines, and practices and beginning to implement them. You go and explore best practice in a school or further afield and construct an action plan to implement a new approach. Embedding. Leaders have successfully introduced systems and practices which staff, pupils, and other stakeholders are following and implementing. At this stage, a launch has taken place. Implementation is underway. Monitoring is securing feedback on performance to refine practice. And then fourth, sustaining. Policies and practices are embedded. There's buy-in from the whole school community. There's cohesive and consistent practice across the school. This takes time. And of course, as I describe it, theoretically, it seems very smooth, but there's combined and uneven development. It's up and down, and it requires leadership to really oversee it. The journey towards sustaining will be fast for some elements and slower for others. It's usually slower than we expect. Bumps in the road, such as high staff turnover, significant changes to the pupil cohort, may impact the journey and slow it down. All of these issues should show in the data, and we should be careful about interpreting them and responding to them. So to sum up what's been covered in the module and in our session, here's a reference back to the key steps in establishing data and accountability around behaviour culture. Set up data capture that can measure culture. Support staff to analyse data effectively to inform planning and delivery. Stream an ongoing commentary on performance to all stakeholders. Utilise the behaviour culture dataset to make informed judgments about performance. That comes to the end of our data monitoring and accountability module. Thank you very much for listening. Any final words from you, Jane?
No, thanks for listening. I hope it's been useful.